Welcome to On Cloud, the podcast for cloud professionals, where we break down the state of cloud computing today and how you can unleash the power of cloud for your enterprise. Now, here's your host, Mike Cavus.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the On Cloud podcast, where we get real about cloud technology. We discuss all the hot topics around cloud computing with the people in the field who do the work every day. I'm your host, Mike Cavus, Chief Cloud Architect over at Deloitte. Today I'm joined by Roger Premo. Roger is IBM General Manager of Corporate Strategy and Ventures. Roger, welcome to the show. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and the work you're doing at IBM?
Yeah. Hey, great to be here. First off. Yeah. So I lead IBM's overall strategy efforts and I lead our venture capital team, which those work together, seeing early innovators in the market and seeing how it informs strategic direction. But I own setting IBM's overall strategy, and we'll talk about it today, but a lot of it has to do with hybrid cloud and AI. So very relevant to today's topic. Before that, I was a strategy consultant for nearly a decade and a half. I led the software and SaaS practice, so worked a lot with a lot of tech innovators. And before that, I had a software startup background, working in SaaS companies before the term SaaS was coined. Go back to being an operator as well.
Yeah, we got a little common there because I did some startups in the SaaS world, but it was when SaaS was known. So
yeah,
cool. Great to have you. One of the first topics, we're going to talk about a white paper that you collaborated with some of my colleagues on over here at Deloitte, and it was titled, "Are You Ready for the Cloud's Third Wave?" And I'm not going to describe what all this is, but I'm going to lead with a little of it. But when cloud first started, there was this mad dash, right? So it was a little short-term thinking, get to the cloud. And I think when COVID hit, everyone's working remote. There was like another level of let's get everything, to SaaS or cloud or something. So what is this third wave that this article is talking about? And we'll include the article in the show notes for people to read later. But what is this third wave, and what did we learn from the first two that hopefully we do different this time around?
I think maybe let's start with what happened in the first wave, right? You hinted that there were these various stages of cloud adoption, but that cloud adoption often happened in a siloed way where one part of the business might adopt a particular cloud vendor, who might acquire a company, or another part of the business worked with a different cloud vendor. And while there was this rush to innovation, it created this sprawl of complexity because we have different practices, different applications, different teams using different environments. And the net of it is that the complexity, there are a lot of factors, but the complexity in particular got in the way of getting the business value out of those migrations to the cloud. And the real thought on this third wave of cloud is based on early adopters that have done this well. And they've been very intentional about taking a hybrid by design approach. That is the notion of creating platforms that span that complexity so that you abstract away some of that complexity and really can get to business value. That intentional architecture really does have a series of different kind of technology and simplification benefits that are part of unlocking that value. And so we see that as critical because I think in a lot of different industries, the adoption of cloud technologies, the adoption of AI, now it's not an optional exercise. That to differentiate and win in your industries, you're going to have to do that well. And if you're doing that on a kind of poorly constructed kind of base architecture, the chances of success are very low. And it's really about helping our joint clients succeed in their digital and AI initiatives.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of clients who are paralyzed from the result of that early rush to the cloud. I was guilty of this too from my startup days. When we started, Amazon only had a dozen APIs, so it truly was just infrastructure, right? So we were thinking like a data center. And over the years, obviously now there's high levels of abstraction, there's machine learning as a service, so it's gone up the stack. But a lot of implementation on top of being rushed were more data center centric and doing the same things we did in the data center in the cloud, which probably wasn't the best use of everyone's time. So there's a lot of companies right now trying to unwind that, but it's hard because that stuff's running segments of the business. So how do we do the intentional architecture, but we still got the spaghetti over here that we're trying to unwind while we're running the business? That's a big problem I see with a lot of clients.
It's a big question, I think. And there's great work from the Deloitte team that went into this study. Only 17% of clients in the Deloitte survey had actually articulated what their future state for cloud was expected to be. And consequently, there's only about 25% of them that said they'd actually gotten ROI from the prior generations of cloud transformation. So we're talking about something where the majority of companies out there haven't articulated. So I think step one is starting to articulate a North Star from an architectural perspective, realizing that it will be a long time to migrate there. But first, you have to have some understanding of what the target state is there. And then secondarily, it's how you're going to get there. And it's a set of, in our perspective, there's a series of quick wins where you can clean up a lot of that complexity. When it gets to modernizing or re-architecting applications, obviously that's the longer journey. And I know you've got a lot of passion on this one too, but it's also about constructing the operating model and the organization that can deliver against that architecture. Because if we have people whose job definition is all about delivering in a particular environment, that the organization reinforces the heterogeneity. So we got to have different ways of constructing and operating the business to take advantage of that intentional hybrid by design approach.
Yeah, and I've seen examples where, a lot of this stuff was done in a silo, right? As you mentioned in the beginning, the cloud team was spun up and they built something and they did a great job of deploying pipelines and getting to something in 5 minutes. But as you said, they didn't address the overall operating model with the rest of the organization. So they still had all the stop gates, all the approvals, all the sign-offs. And even though they could do something in 5-10 minutes, it still took them 3 months to get it to production. The companies that are doing it right, how are they addressing this big operating model challenge?
I'd say a couple of things. I think one is they are breaking down some of the organizational silos, both within their teams and to the business, because this is not about delivering the IT department to be completely distinct from the business. It is about the integration of business and technology together. So a couple of examples. One, I've seen one starting down on this hybrid by design journey. And it specifically got to what I was mentioning earlier. They had cloud teams dedicated against particular hyperscale cloud vendors. And then they had a data center team. And if your job description says, I'm all about putting more workload in my data center, or I'm all about putting more workload in vendor X, you'd fight the hybrid cloud initiatives. And so they actually had to create a hybrid cloud team that had skills from both sides that created something where they placed the right workload in the right location, and it took away the kind of organizational incentives to compete for turf in different environments. So we saw that within the technology teams themselves. Similarly, we've seen the kind of the DevOps teams as well. So that making sure that all the way up to the developer writing applications, you don't make them about being a Cloud X developer. You make them about being an application developer for your enterprise. So we've seen a lot of that within technology teams to take away some of those kind of vendor dependent silos. With the business, we've just seen the collaboration model with the business, but recognizing that as we do that, we need to have a much tighter loop with the business stakeholders for whom we're doing this innovation, because it is unlocking a lot of that complexity. It does allow the ability to kind of innovate with the business much more rapidly, but you almost have to have much more of a software product development mindset around how you collaborate with the business, rather than an IT long-term roadmap requirements documents type of mindset. So it really takes this kind of product-oriented thinking and how we treat effectively the business as one of my key customers in building new technology products to support their operations.
Yeah, and these problems we're talking about have existed since the beginning of time. I think what changed is the promise of the velocity of delivery has made it, we need to solve these things faster. So an example, a long time ago, way before cloud, I was in application development, and I was one of 4 VPs. Somebody owned database, somebody owned infrastructure, somebody owned something else. And we all had our top 10 lists, and none of my stuff was on any of theirs, and none of theirs stuff was on any of mine. I couldn't get work done, none of us, because we all needed something from someone else, but we had a different top 10 list. So not only is it the operating model, but rethink how you budget, all those types of things. It's more being a team rather than specialists and silos. And that's easy to say, but that's, I always say technology is easy, people hard. That's people. That's organizational structure. That's turf wars. Who, Have you seen people solve that one? And when they do, what's the makeup of those teams? What does a successful organization look like culturally that can pull that off?
So I think actually there's a much more detailed step-by-step guide in the white paper that starts getting down the path of really addressing some of these questions. Because obviously, Mike, we're tackling massive technology and business change questions, and it's hard to distill it down to just a couple quick answers. But I'd say, first off, the success pattern I've seen relates back to that product mindset. If I go back to my software product background, a lot of those are solved by the prioritization that a product manager does. I think of the product manager as the person who's marrying kind of customer needs with technical feasibility, technical possibility, and building a prioritized roadmap. And that product manager lives in two worlds, right? They've got to spend time with their technology team about what can they implement. And they got to spend time with their end customers about what is the most important thing, really building empathy with the business about what they really need. And so I put a lot of that into these product management thought processes of how do you put this decision making into one roadmap. And so if you empower those product oriented teams to drive that decision making and prioritize that technology roadmap based on what best serves the business, not all the folks who like there's different technology silos that may not like the answer to that roadmap because it's different than their priority list, but it tends to be much better oriented to what the business needs. And back to the hybrid by design notion, if you're doing it in a way in which it's not bespoke for each of the different technology environments, that also means product innovation you're doing. If you've got like a geographic business where part of it's serving clients in US and Europe, and they're on different clouds in different geographies, it also means that when you're prioritizing that product roadmap, you're doing it for the full business and not doing it to, again, implement on this cloud here. And the customers in Europe have to wait another year or two to get their function. So again, the hybrid by design platform thinking accelerates the value you can get from a product oriented approach.
Yeah, and the business doesn't care which cloud you're on, or even if you're on a cloud, all they care is you're delivering. And we in IT sometimes get stuck in the ones and zeros, but at the end of the day, we have to deliver. So yeah, that's incredibly important. One other thing I wanted to put out there, because we talked a little bit about AI at the beginning, is a lot of companies are wanting to train their own models, and they don't want that in the public cloud. Not all things, but there are lots and lots of use cases for doing this stuff in-house. So it's creating a rebirth, not that it ever went anywhere, but a rebirth of the private cloud. Again, hitting on the importance of this hybrid by design. How is AI driving this hybrid by design and putting it in the spotlight more than before?
So first off, I was just with one of the leading market analysts in the space this morning, and they were going through the inquiries they're getting from customers on it. And they said, I've covered hundreds of Gen AI requests from the Global 2000, and 100% of them are hybrid multi-cloud. They're going to have to deal with Gen AI. Practically every large company in the world is hybrid multi-cloud, and they're thinking about doing their Gen AI in a similar footprint, because the mindset is, I'm not going to relitigate where all my applications and processes run. I'm going to bring the Gen AI to where my workflows are today. And for most large companies around the world, that is hybrid multi-cloud. And then I think if you get to your training use case, and I'd extend it to not just from scratch training, but any kind of fine tuning where you're using the enterprise's data. You're working with data assets that are the crown jewels of the company. And in a lot of cases, that data was kept on premise because there was real concerns about having it leave the four walls of the enterprise for both data regulations and for data security reasons. And I think that, to your point, it's even more true in this generative AI era. If you build or fine tune a model with your enterprise data, you're effectively taking the intellectual property of your company and putting it into one model. And so the security bar for this should be much higher than it might have been for an individual piece of data, because all of a sudden that Gen AI is aware of kind of your IP and your competitive advantage. So I think, yes, it is driving a big a big resurgence in the data center, and there's a lot of demand from customers to do a lot of their model training and tuning within their data center, especially while a lot of the other kind of governance, security, explainability, access challenges of generative AI still have big questions marks around them. I think for companies that want to take advantage of it, but still want to not accidentally trip a tripwire, yeah, we are seeing a lot of demand for that kind of data center training and tuning of these models.
So for the clients who went to the cloud kind of siloed, right? They built like a cloud organization and had a different data center organization. And even in those situations, now a lot of the AI capabilities and at least some of the models are going to be on-prem. So for the ones that didn't solve the things we're talking about are here, right? The operating model challenges and those types of things. How hard is it going to be for them? And what should they do to really get the value out of AI? The ones that do it right will get there fast. The ones that don't, you're going to see 2-3 years of investment and very little return. Get your crystal ball out. How's this going to play out?
So I have talked to some CTOs that have said, we went through this framework, right? Hybrid by default and hybrid by design. And they acknowledged like they and their predecessors allowed the business to get to hybrid by default. And they recognize the incredible value generative AI is going to create, the complexity it's going to create that you're getting to just now. And then just the cost point, recognizing that depending on the model and the vendor, if it's running in the data center versus running as a cloud API, you can have orders of magnitude different spend levels on the inference of these things. So they recognize the stakes are high. And at least a couple, when they look at something like this, says, I want to use generative AI as the catalyst to get to the right intentional architectures around how I do my technology. And they look at the sins of the past and learn from them to say, it needs to be different now. At the same time, I think the reality is you still also see a bunch of pilots spinning up on different clouds and different API calls to different vendors. So I think the challenge to our clients who lead the technology organizations for many of these large enterprises is to really quickly start building that North Star of where you want to get to from a technical architecture and start building towards that, because we know the same challenges that we talked about before are going to manifest in the AI era, but we can at least learn from the mistakes and do it right this time. So you got to start building a target of the destination where to guide the organization towards. The last thing I'd say is everybody recognizes that generative AI, you probably want to relook at that on a much more regular basis because it's been such a dynamic technology, new model vendors, new innovations, new patterns of how to tune these models. It probably is something where you want to write down a North Star today, but you almost want to schedule the process by which you revisit that North Star based on what you learned. I'd love to have a better answer than that, but IBM strategy, it is something where we're just finding the cycle of learning is much shorter in this technology than it has been in prior technologies.
Yeah. And the other thing that I keep thinking out loud to myself is that the technology, as amazing as it is in its infancy stage, right? It's not even close to where it's going to be. So we're already seeing so much value when done right, where people can be more productive, work can be offloaded to machines and all that, but it's not pretty yet, right? The machines still need to learn better. There's still bias in it. So it's got a long way to go. Just like when we started cloud, where we are today is leap years ahead. So
yeah, no, I think we're very similar. We're probably even earlier than, what was it? You said 12 APIs on the cloud. We're probably even earlier than the 12 APIs era. But yeah, we've got so much more to do. And that's why like this notion of hybrid by design matters a lot. We know so much change is going. If I'm building an architecture that locks me into like a particular silo today for generative AI, you can almost guarantee that's not going to be the right answer for the business a couple of years from now. Building an intentional architecture that has the notion of being able to run across environments and have that flexibility now, it's super important. And it'll just be essential to businesses deriving real value from this at scale.
Are you seeing teams our clients bringing in like organizational change management groups? Because we've both been in IT for a long time, and typically IT just does it all. But we saw it with cloud, and we're seeing it here. It's just getting to where a lot of this is people in process and change, and there are people who do that for a living, and us IT nerds probably aren't the best at that. Are you seeing companies finally starting to bring in HR teams, change management experts to help on this journey?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. I think for a lot of the consultants and advisors that focus, on that change management, but I think it's not just the raw change management skills. It's ones that have technical fluency, or they bring in the technology practice alongside. So you're doing it with an understanding of where this tech is going. Absolutely. And I see a lot of work out there from many different advisors really looking at the future of this, looking at the future of how it changes the work and roles in the organization, how you have to reconstruct the organization to take advantage of this technology. Yeah, it already is a tailwind for a lot of those kind of change and organizational advisors. And we're just at the very beginnings of this work, because we're just really beginning to see the first front end of this really changing workforces. And I can just say in IBM's business, we've seen huge productivity because we try to use ourselves as early adopters of this technology. We're seeing a ton of efficiency areas where work at 40% productivity in certain teams around the adoption of this technology. And then it really reshapes our workforce. So we're seeing it firsthand in our business as well. And we're being our own advisor through that process, but there'll be huge changes to how work gets done, how processes execute, and the shape of labor inside companies that adopt this technology.
Get your crystal ball out again, because that's what it takes for all this Gen AI stuff. But fast forward 5 years, and we're just throwing darts at the dartboard here, but how much of a difference in competition do you see? Let's say there's two insurance companies or head to head, and one embraces this change and does all the hybrid by design stuff and actually pulls it off, versus a company that resists it. What is the risk there for the company that resists it, and what kind of a step change do you think this would be in that scenario?
I'm a strong believer that we've hit this tipping point where, technology, we've done CEO surveys and things like that. If we look at CEOs and board, technology innovation is a top 3 kind of board priority across industries. And that's a recognition that this is not, a small thing where I'm just shifting what it used to be a cost point, right? It was like, how much of my revenue am I spending on IT? And you're trying to minimize this. This is now fundamentally shaping winners and losers. So if I pick that insurance context, I think everything from claims done with generative AI, interpreting photographs and taking transcript, taking a voice interaction so that claim filing is done almost human free, if not completely, in a much more delightful way, so that what you expect of your best agent today is consistently the norm for that insurance company, or pick your industry domain. I think it's very little labor expense spent on executing your best all the time. And I think the rest of the customer experience is going to be delightful and highly efficient, driven by this technology. So I think, if you think of why does a customer choose an insurance company, it's ease of signing up, contracting, understand what you're buying. That's going to be driven by generative AI. It's going to be showing up at their best the time that you have to make a claim. And that's a stressful period in that customer's life. If they do that well and have delightful service, that will drive loyalty. Then the companies that do that are going to operate at a much more efficient economic point. So they'll just be much more successful businesses for their shareholders. Yeah, I'm a big believer that we're actually already seeing the evidence of that now. And in 3 to 5 years, the companies we look at as the leaders in their spaces will be the leaders in innovating with Gen AI as well.
I totally agree with that. In our day to day, whether it's at work or at home, everything has a tin of Gen AI on it. All of our office products are inherently having it, all the tools that we use both in work and play. And I start thinking, what is a website that I go search for words and have a sitemap? I think that will be dead. right? It's more going to be an interactive type thing. So what's the future of the interface, right? Are we still building websites 5 years from now? Or are we talking to bots? Or where do you see all this heading?
In IBM Ventures, I get a great vantage point on that, just seeing a bunch of early stage innovators. And we use this notion of AI thick and AI thin. But AI thick, first of all, I think there's a bunch of categories in which you will see Gen AI deeply into the workflow, and it will transform how we work. And so I think the easy ones that you see already happening, if you look at code, if you look at legal, if you look at accounting, it's very clear that where you've got a really well structured language by which you do the business and a really great source of truth of like training up what is a good accounting document or a good piece of code, things like that. There's great training sets out there that have real structure to them. So I think those categories, you're going to see the work in those categories completely transformed. And if you're not adopting it, you're truly falling behind. And then in the interface that's AI thin, I think that's what we refer to as the new UI. I think 5 years from now, there's still web interfaces, but I think much more of our interaction is conversational. And we see it in a bunch of application categories. If you think of how much a knowledge worker spends in an ERP system or a workforce management system, just clicking a web interface to get to data that they need, it's a dozen clicks to mine down to the location that you can get the information you need. I think the future is much, much more, it's a query interface, maybe a quick one or two clarifying questions from the Gen AI, and you're often doing your work. And I think that will become a norm. Now, I would say one other thing inside of IBM, we're using, like I said, a lot of this technology in with IT support, if it's our HR transactions, things like that. We're leaning into it. We believe that actually learning how to use this now and getting fluent on how to make the Gen AI help you with your work on a day-by-day basis is an important professional skill to build out. Just like maybe a little bit at the very front end of my career, but as people move from paper to emails, or maybe it's from emails to Slack and messages, this is a new way to drive. This is how a professional has to interact with technology to get their job done. So for everybody listening, I had to say, lean into using some of the chatbots in your business, because some of them won't be perfect experiences, but one, your dev teams can learn from your feedback on that. And two, over time, we're all going to interact with one of these interfaces to get our work done. That's going to become a huge part of our day. So start building those skills now, because I think they're going to be a major part of your workflow. I'm not willing to say the website is completely obsolete. I think there's a place for quiet reading and information discovery out there, but it'll be much less of the time we spend every day.
Yeah, great answer. I agree with that. My lifelong dream of watching Batman is to just sit there and ask questions and get answers. So we're getting closer to the Batcave, per se. Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, so great conversation. We're going to have to get you back in a year when all this has changed and see how we did and talk about what's going to happen 5 years out from there. But this stuff's moving really fast. If you have white papers or if you're on socials, where can people find you to learn more about what you guys are doing here?
So first of all, I'm on LinkedIn, Roger Premo, so you can check me out. I post often on the topic. I'd encourage everybody to check out the white paper. Some of the IBM team helped, but it really was a great Deloitte team that drove it. Are You Ready for Cloud's Third Wave? Is a great read on this that gets from everything that we've talked about the business necessity to this, and then all the way through to how to get started. So I encourage people to check those out. And I'm always open to a conversation on LinkedIn to explore these further.
Awesome. So that's it for today's podcast. Make sure you like us, leave a review, and subscribe. You can also check out previous episodes wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. You can always find me on Twitter, MadGreek65, or you can reach out to me directly on email, mcavis@deloitte.com. We're still using email. And feel free to write me with questions of what you want to talk about in future podcasts. And thanks for listening to the On Cloud podcast. We will see you next time.
Thank you for listening to On Cloud for Cloud Professionals with Mike Kavis. Connect with Mike on LinkedIn and visit the Deloitte On Cloud blog at deloitte.com/US/Deloitte-on-cloud-blog. Be sure to rate and review the show on your favorite podcast app.